Everyone for coming out this afternoon and being on this Zoom Cannabis Ad Hoc Committee meeting. So we're going to give it another minute or two to make sure everyone gets on and work out any problems like that. But we really appreciate you taking the time today to be with us. And so right now we have Supervisor Williams and myself. And then we have Megan Duquette from the Cannabis Department, and Brent Schultz, the head of Planning and Building, and John Burks, who's in Code Enforcement, and Trent Taylor. Anyone else I'm missing? So anyway, we'll give it another minute, and thanks for being here. All right, so we have a lot of people, 73 people on the line right now, so maybe it's time to get started. And again, I'm John Haschak, 3rd District Supervisor, here with Ted Williams, 5th District Supervisor. Together we make up the Cannabis Ad Hoc Committee. And thank you all for being on the line today. And we hope to be able to answer some questions, give you an update about what we're doing, and then take some public comment. So the way the meeting is going to be set up today is Supervisor Williams and I will speak for about the first 15-20 minutes, and then we'll take questions for the next 20-30 minutes, and then we will have public comment for the last 40 minutes. We have to be done by 5:30, so at 5:25 we'll kind of wrap things up, and hopefully that works. And if you have questions beyond what we talk about today, then please give us a call or an email, and we'll put that information in the chat box. And like I said earlier, we have Megan Duquette from the Cannabis Department, head of Cannabis Department, and then Brent Schultz, head of Planning and Building, John Burks, and Trent Taylor from Code Enforcement. So hopefully we can answer questions and we can make this a productive afternoon. So again, thanks everyone for being here. I'm going to turn right now to Megan to talk about some of the logistics of if you have questions or how it might work. So Megan, do you have anything to say with what people need to know?
Absolutely. Thank you, Supervisor Haschak. I just wanted to say thanks everybody for being here today. As soon as Supervisor Haschak and Williams are finished with their update, we will go into the question period, and I can go over the details again at that time. But for those who are joining us on a computer or the Zoom app, you will be able to type in your questions at the bottom at the questions box, and then we will address those. And those of you who are joining us by telephone, you will be able to ask questions by dialing *9, which is the function to raise your hand, and we will get to you. And if time permits, we can take questions from Facebook. So you can, those of you that are joining us via Facebook Live can type in your questions in the comment section, and we'll hopefully be able to address those questions. And then lastly, when we get to the public comment section, what we'll do is we will have the ability for you to raise your hand if you're using the computer or the Zoom app, or dial *9 if you're joining us by phone. And then we just kindly ask that you limit your public comment to about 2 to 3 minutes so that we can have as many participants be able to provide comment during our meeting today. So I will turn this back over to Supervisor Haschak and Williams. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Megan. So just as far as an update goes, Supervisor Williams, would you like to start it off?
Maybe I'll follow your lead today.
Okay. All right. Well, let's see. Ted and I have met with the top people in CDFW, and we've had quite a few meetings with CDFA. And Monday, we have a meeting with Nicole Elliott, who's from the governor's office in charge of the whole cannabis um, issues. And so all of our questions are really trying to figure out this CEQA issue that we have. And we thought we were making progress in the county. And then it turned out that the work product that CDFA wanted from the county was going to be really, thousands of hours. And so we're just trying to figure out how we can get that done and take care, figure out this pathway for the annual license. We also had a meeting last week with CDFA and their governmental liaison to the legislator, and with Senator McGuire's office and Assemblymember Wood's office. And really we were talking about the CEQA issue and the issue about the deadline for the provisional licenses, which expire on January 1st, 2022. So that's only 13 months away. And I know that's causing a lot of anxiety for people. So the conversation around that was we need an extension. And CDFA recognizes we need an extension. Our legislators realize that too. And so it seems like there's a concerted effort to push that with the governor's office and the legislature and try to get that going. But at the same time, they want to make sure that we're working towards a pathway to get people to their annual licenses. They don't want us to just wait and say, okay, well, we're going to get an extension so we don't have to do anything. No, we need to keep moving forward. And right now, we're trying to explore all the options with those paths forward, whatever those options might be. And let's see, anything else, Ted? Well, Ted's got a lot.
Yeah, so the options, and I want to reiterate that Supervisor Haschak and I both see state annual licenses as the #1 priority. We don't always align perfectly on the next steps to get there, what the shortest path is. And I find myself questioning my ideas, asking, is he right? And I think that's a healthy sign. But we both understand without these annual licenses, there isn't a cannabis industry in Mendocino County, at least not a legal one. So the options to get to state licenses today, and none of these paths are straightforward. I'm not seeing any certainty, but so that you can give us some feedback on where you would like us to go. Phase 1, trying to document our ministerial stack of paperwork to meet the state site-specific CEQA requirement. Looks to be a multi-million-dollar project. Looks like applicants didn't pay for this work. This is outside of the original fee hearing. I think it's a substantial workload. 30 to 35,000 hours of staff time could run $5 million plus. We'd have to use an outside contractor. There's no way we're going to find enough local labor to do it in time. Outside contractors will need access to the records. The records are not in digital form. They're spread in multiple offices and paper. It's when you look at the details up close of what that process is, it sure doesn't look feasible. I feel like I want to be realistic. I don't want to ask cultivators to walk the plank and be surprised that we go down a path and we just can't get to their annual license. So I'm really hesitant about that option. I don't think it'll work. But if cultivators want to try it, I'm happy to support you in it. 2, we move to a discretionary use permit model similar to Humboldt. And what's good about that is we would be moving towards annual licenses. That is a process that is proven to work. What's not good about it is probably a lot of folks, when they do the site-specific review, will get denied for cause. And how long will it take? If we staff up 4 or 5 times the staffing that we have today, if that's possible, it'll probably take 12 to 14 years to get through the current backlog at the rate Humboldt moves. Maybe we can move faster, but I would expect parity with Humboldt best case. So that route is possible, but it's not very plausible that we would get through in whatever extension period is offered by the state. 8102 R2 is I would say the default path. It's not really a workaround. The default path is if a cultivator is in a county that doesn't do its own site-specific review, perhaps our county, cultivators can do full sequence, submit direct to CDFA. CDFA has called this the nuclear option. They're not fond of it because they don't have staff to process the incoming paperwork. But they agree with us that it is a legal option. It is in current regulation. I don't want to encourage small farms to go this route because site-specific CEQA is probably expensive. I don't know what it'll mean in terms of provisional license continuity. You may not be in, as far as the state is concerned, you may not be in progress on CEQA, which is a requirement for having a provisional license. Those licenses could get extended. So it's a bit of an unknown. There may be some larger farms, medium-sized, that are willing to risk the cost of a consultant doing site-specific CEQA. And if they do that, I would love to hear about it so that we can document the hurdles. And then last, we've asked staff to look at treating cannabis more like ag. Clearly, at a state level, professions code, it's not agriculture. But there may be some ability to treat it more like agriculture at a county level. And I think this is a bit of a long shot. We see that Santa Cruz has taken some steps in this direction. We don't know exactly what it would mean. So don't ask today for the exact scenario of what, of how that would flow. We don't know. The reason we went back to the board to ask for permission to use staff is to begin researching. We couldn't allocate staff resources to even research it without getting full board approval. And so that's where we are now. We've told staff, you can use a little bit of your time to look at the viability of treating cannabis cultivation more like ag at a county level. I think that's all I have. Of course, I'm worried that a year from now, we may not have a legal cannabis market in Mendocino County.
Well, another thing that we learned in our discussions with CDFA last week was that they were saying that we could try to explore categorical exemptions too as a pathway. And so we're looking at everything we can and we're trying to figure out what's going to work because that's our mission, is to make it work. And with that, I don't have much more. So Megan, do you want to go to questions now?
Yes, we can. And so those of you that just joined us and you would like to ask a question, I wanted to let you know that we're going to spend about 30 minutes for questions and answers. Those of you that are joining us via the Zoom app or your computer, you can type your questions in the question box at the bottom. Those of you with a question joining us by telephone, please raise your hand by dialing *9. And if time permits, we will take questions from Facebook. So those of you that are joining us on Facebook Live, please place your questions in the comment section and we will try to answer your questions. And it looks like we already have 10 questions that have come in. And the first question is from Jude Tillman. And it says, do you agree that this is it is appropriate for the county to do sensitive species habitat review and whatever other preliminary work is needed to be done to figure out all the viable options and identify which pathway each of our phase 1 operator projects is best suited for?
Well, I think that's what Supervisor Williams and I got going with the CDFW is we got this interagency agreement so that we could hire some biologists from CDFW to do the sensitive species review. And so, we, at the last meeting, we talked about just doing that for people who were renewing their permits, but I think that needs to be looked at again in the new year, because I think that everyone who's in the program should have the sensitive species review option. And if we can get a couple biologists on, we can work through them fairly quickly. They say it will take, well, each biologist could do 2 in a day. And those are the ones that get referred to them. And so those are the more difficult cases. With our pilot program that Trent Taylor really worked and Megan worked on with CDFW for a long time, we got that approved. And that would give the county the ability to screen out the easy cases. And so if it's not a difficult case, it wouldn't even need to go to the biologist. The biologist would just deal with the more difficult cases. They can do 2 a day. So it should really help expedite that process.
I agree. Cultivators, when they paid for their license, they paid for this step to be completed. Unfortunately, when the program was being administered by Ag, it appears 190 licenses were issued, skipping over the SSHR step. And so I don't want to give a false impression. I don't believe that doing the SSHR is really moving cultivators closer to a state annual license. But it is bringing them in line with our phase 1 county ordinance. So it's probably a good idea. They've already paid for it. We gave board direction to continue. We have a contract with CDFW, which will help. So in the last few months, I've learned a lot about this program. And I learned that the ordinance required this sensitive species review and designated CDFW by name, but didn't collect any funds. So we weren't paying CDFW to do the analysis. You can imagine we send these over. They're not getting paid for it. I mean, I don't know if there's any other permit that they process without some financial component. And so these were just stacking up. And so in meeting with CDFW, Megan and Brent and Counsel and John and I managed to come to terms on CDFW bringing in some retired biologists at the county's expense to process these.
Are you ready for the next question?
Yeah.
This question is from Charles, and he writes, when the Coastal Commission comes back with a modified ordinance, do you know how many cultivation permits will be issued in the coastal district?
Well, we don't know how many people will apply, so it's hard to say how many permits will be issued. You know, one of the benefits of the coast is that given that a use permit is required, that provides some discretionary. So no, I don't think we know how many until we see how many applicants. I mean, applicants may get one look at what's been going on and walk the other way for all I know.
So I have a longer question, and it's the first part of it is, in order to assess the phase 1 cohort and identify which pathway works best for each case, the county obviously needs the applications to be updated, complete, and organized. More and more of the 30-day notices have been going out requesting updated site plans, missing documents, and some documents never previously requested. The hope, of course, is that this process will lead to the county having all the documents necessary to make a determination for each applicant about which pathways might be appropriate options for their project. Electronic submissions of these files should cut down on staff review time now that the submissions are electronic and contain up-to-date information. What is the new projection of file review time? It was 5 hours per file because the county's filing system wasn't affected. Are the 30-day notices working to get applications updated and organized? And if so, can you begin categorizing and informing applicants where they stand?
Well, that's a good question for Megan, isn't it?
And I can do my best in answering. And I would say that we have been sending out corrections letters, yes, and we will continue to do so. And I would say that our response rate has been less than stellar. I would say that so far, I would say approximately we've been getting a 30% response rate from applicants to our request for additional information. And so I would highly encourage folks to work on submitting those documents. And and making sure that the submission is complete. Oftentimes we will get one of the documents we requested and not all of them. So making sure that that the submissions have all the documents that are requested so that we can go ahead and do that processing of your application. And then the part of that question was about how many hours per file, and I think that's very difficult to answer because sometimes it's very site specific. It does take quite a few hours just to assess the file and then to work on sending a corrections letter, but that does not include the time that it takes to process it once we have all the documents back. And so it depends on the deficiencies will depend on how many hours it will take to process the application. And I hope I answered that sufficiently.
So, Megan, about how many of the 30-day notices are generating complete responses with everything you need?
Right now, I don't have all the numbers right in front of me, but I would say it's roughly 10 to 20% of those folks. So, you know, everything that you can do to provide all the documents that are requested the first time would, you know, help our staff process efficiently.
All right. And Megan, I think that's an important point, is that if people could respond to those notices as quickly as possible, you know, certainly harvest time was taking up people's time and everything, but that would certainly help the county. And if you didn't receive a notice, then you should probably contact the cannabis department and let them know that you moved or your mailing address is different or whatever, so that we can, that the communication can be clear. I also got a message from Sheriff Kendall that he's on the line. So thank you, Sheriff Kendall, for your interest in this, and welcome. And I see that there's 106 people on the line, so it's a great turnout. And thank you, everyone, for your time this afternoon. So Megan, do you have another question? I see 32 on.
Yes, so this is a part 2 from Brandy Moulton, and her question is, are the 30-day notices working to get applications updated and organized? And if so, can you begin categorizing and informing applicants where they stand? And the second part of that is, can the county begin to use this information to point what pathway could be right for each applicant? Either continuing processing through phase 1 using Appendix G, using categorical exemptions to issue an NOE, discretionary use permit, direct submission to CDFA. And lastly, operators need clarity sooner rather than later. And they would like to know where they stand.
If I could just answer that, I think that that's what we just talked about this afternoon, earlier this afternoon. Ted and I met with the cannabis department, and we were talking about these kind of scenarios that if we have the information from people, we can more easily determine what pathway might be possible and the options available. And it would certainly help us be able to make a clear decision on what kind of program we need to keep going or create to make it for the, you know, work for the most people. So the more you can get that information, the quicker you can get that information into the cannabis department, that would help kind of give us a clearer idea on what we're dealing with. Ted, what would you add to that?
I've heard the staff estimate is if we get everything in, we may be able to process 10 to 15% of the 1,100 that are in the queue. And that's part of why I'm not terribly excited about phase 1. I think that a lot of folks are going to, most are going to end up back in the illicit market or shut down. And John and I can, you know, go into more detail about this, but staff walked us through that pilot program of 20 that we did. And there's all sorts of reasons, you know, drying sheds built without permits, plot plan not matching, ag ponds put in, no permit, electrical work done, no permit, permits not finalized. Clearing on satellite images, shifting one year to the next, larger and larger. You know, any one of those issues, if a planner writes that up and submits it to CDFW and CDFA, they're going to point out this is not in line with your own ordinance, and arguably it's not. And so it creates a predicament that, you know, we can't expect a planner to sign a site-specific CEQA documentation if it's not complete, or if they don't think it's in line with our county permit. And it surprised me just how many out of the random sampling are seemingly not in line with our county ordinance. And, you know, whether it's open for discussion, whether there's some areas where that ordinance is just too stringent and we're holding people out. But there's also elements of cannabis cultivation is like agriculture, in that 1 year, you know, you plant in one area, and due to market demand and weather conditions and rotating crops, maybe you decide you're going to move that greenhouse or put up a different greenhouse, change it slightly. And if you filed 2 or 3 years ago, your application may not match what's actually on the ground today, which of course that satellite image is going to be used to match up. And if it doesn't match, you're not following the ordinance. Your application is stale. And that's part of why we're re-requesting data. It's not just that the county lost it. Certainly the county has lost some paperwork for various reasons. You know, one, just to give an example, is some of the incoming data went by email to an ag employee who's no longer with the county, trying to find that in an old email box somewhere and cross-reference it. It's more time than just asking for that again. So the county likely has lost some of the information, but it's also a matter of 2 or 3 years in the pipeline. A lot of cultivators have changed, and it's completely understandable why they've changed. And this is probably the way they've worked since they started cultivating. It's not 100% the same setup every year. But unfortunately for CEQA purposes, it needs to be. The documentation needs to match what's actually on the ground.
Are you ready for the next question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, great. This question is from Patrick Sellers. When the CEQA issues started coming to light, the first alternative pathway that was proposed was to develop a discretionary use permit process that phase 1 operators could be processed through. What is the status of the phase 3 discretionary use permit ordinance, and what is the projected start date? If phase 1 truly turns out to be a dead end for some of these folks, can the results of this process be utilized to fast track their discretionary use permit process? Specifically, we'd like to request that the county revisit the idea of an expedited administrative permit. Can the county offer an expedited administrative permit for, at minimum, phase 1 operators who hit a dead end using their phase 1 application materials as the basis of their administrative permit application? And can this be done in a way that allows them to continue cultivating without having a gap in their county authorization for their state provisional licensure until their county permit is finalized and their state annual license is granted?
John, do you want me to take a swing at this, or do you?
If
No,
you'd
go
like,
ahead.
Supervisors, I could take that first one on the discretionary process.
Go for it.
This is Brent Schultz, Planning and Building Service Director. Julia has been working on that, our chief planner. She is worked on a rough draft of that. Our estimated schedule to take that back to the board. Remember, we have to take all discretionary ordinances have to go back to the Planning Commission first. So that ordinance would go to the Planning Commission first, then on to with their recommendation to the board. We think the best case scenario was probably April, May, and then it be adopted sometime after that. So it's not a fast process, but that's our best shot at that right now.
Brent, out of general fairness to folks who have been trying to do everything right for the phase 1 and may hit a dead end, can we prioritize them for phase 3? Doesn't seem right to let new people in ahead of those who have been jumping through hoops for years.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea, Supervisor. And I think I'd like to, let me take that up with County Counsel on how, is that possible? Or is there any, but that is a great idea about that approach.
And I think one of the other concerns is the gap if a person switches from the phase 1 to the phase 3 and they're going for a discretionary, then there'd be a gap, and how would that be dealt with? Does that make sense? Brent?
Yes, and I do concur with that, especially, you know, our legacy cultivators have worked so hard at this process that makes a lot of sense. But I want to check that with the county council. Certainly I can get back to you on that.
And just so everyone knows, as we've been working with CDFA, we've made it clear in each meeting that we're not giving up on phase 1. And, you know, all of those that are still in progress should remain in progress. We're looking at other options in case phase 1 doesn't work, but we're not at the point of pulling the plug on it. And I think it's important that we maintain the in progress status for so that provisionals can be renewed.
Yeah, and I think that I think CDFA, which is the California Department of Food and Agriculture, which oversees Cannabis, I think their desire is for our phase 1 people to succeed too, and that they want our small growers to be viable and to get to their annual permits. So we have this mutual interest.
Okay, I think we'll go on to our next question. It's from Rio Cardone. And he writes, if I've been a part of the regulated cannabis since the 9.31 program, I wonder if there are people who have been a part of this regulatory process who are on the ag properties and have had no issue since we began. Is there a mechanism to provide those properties, cultivators, a negative declaration or a mitigated negative declaration, and therefore allow them to get an annual license? Additionally, can you give us the tools to do the CEQA on our own, especially if our properties are not at risk for major environmental problems?
Yeah. So those are both really good questions. All cultivation statewide is subject to CEQA because voters in California did not deem it to be agriculture. It's you know, think of it as building a gas station or a shopping mall in your backyard. That's the standard you're being held to, best I can tell. So the answer is no. Nobody is exempt from CEQA. Doing your own site-specific CEQA, you certainly can. I don't believe you need to hire a consultant, but if you've never done it, if you're not an expert in this area and you want it to pass CDFA, probably a good idea to hire a consultant who has a solid track record of environmental impact reports. I don't think John and I know what the cost will be. We've heard prices as low as $11,000, as high as $80,000. And I'm sure it depends on the property, the development to date, which consultant you use, how reputable they are. And that's why I have a hard time encouraging small farms to go down that path. There's a chance that you will negate your in-progress status. So you would temporarily lose the provisional until the CEQA is accepted, and could be very costly. And as far as time frame, CDFA has told us months to years to process. They don't have staff assigned to this because other counties have a local process that generates adequate documentation. Cultivators don't have to go through CEQA for the state.
Our next question is from Marnie. The county needs to take the time to prioritize all of the applicants and decide which ones would qualify to use the Appendix G, which ones need to hire outside consultants, and I apologize. Which ones need to hire outside consultants and which ones are exempt? How will this be done?
So I think what everybody here wants, including us, is some certainty. We want to see the flow chart and know if we go down the steps properly, what the outcome will be. And really what I've learned over the last few months is there's no guarantee here. And part of this is when we did the pilot program, the first couple project descriptions we gave to CDFA they rejected. And so we know we know what's too little. And then we did a couple more that got accepted, and a lot of people have asked, well, why can't you just do that across the board? CEQA in this regard is a show your work exercise. Essentially, the county is able to open its books and show what it did with the documentation the county has that was used to issue the county permit. If that's enough for the state, great, you can get your state license. If it's not enough, we can't go make an additional work product because we're falsifying documents. We're claiming that some additional work was part of the issuance of the permit. It wasn't. So how many of the 1,100 fall into the category of there's enough documentation to meet the state standard versus those where the state will reject? John and I don't know. Staff doesn't know. I don't know if CDFA even knows until they see it. And so we may have to get at that result, we may have to go through an exercise, trial and error, spending a lot of money, spending a lot of time, asking cultivators for a lot of documentation to see what comes back. And if you all want to do that and there's a funding mechanism for it, I'm happy to support it, but I don't want to give a false impression. From what I've heard, I don't think many will be accepted. I think the 15% is probably about right. If there was a way for us to dig through all of our 1,100 and identify which of those 1,100 are the 15% that will succeed, let's try to get them through. I'm game, but I don't know if we know that yet. There's some where staff can say, hey, there's an ag pond and it's spanning a property line that wasn't there 3 years ago. That's not going to work. We can probably weed some out, but it's not going to be an exact science. And you're going to be stuck with a cost. The weighted rate for cost recovery for planners is, I think, about $90 an hour. Figure staff can do some, but others will need to be outsourced. A planning contractor is about $160 to $175 an hour, and you're probably looking at 30 hours. So it's not an insignificant expense. If cultivators want to spend $4,000 or $5,000 trying this, I support you. But I don't want to give the false impression. John, do you want to tag on to this?
No, I think that was a great explanation. Yeah, I don't have anything to add.
Our next question is from Corinne Powell, and she asks, what exactly is staff doing now towards these vague objectives?
Megan, did you want to talk about
Julia Acker has been working on putting a draft for the phase 3 use permits together. This was directed by the full board. We haven't been able to work with Supervisor McCowan, of course, because of Brown Act, and I know he had that task. My only communication with him has been he needed a desktop computer because he couldn't do change history on his laptop or some such. I tried to help. I don't know that he's going to get a working setup to author it by the end of the year, which means it falls entirely on Julia. I don't think that work is necessarily competing with the other tasks. That's relatively small and it's using different resources. So that's happening. Megan has been sending out the 30-day letters and working on getting the results that come back from the 20% into a structured format so that we have a better way to analyze the permits and filter. And other staff is working on the regular renewal process for permits. And so it's my take that with the current staff, we're about maxed out. Anything additional we ask them to do, something has to fall off.
And if I could add to that, supervisors, there was about 10 tasks for the cannabis program to work on and get done at the meeting of the 22nd. And Megan and her small team have gotten all those done, but about 4 of those are still in process. And we discussed those at the board meeting. She is still working with CDFW to try to get this interagency agreement done, but we're waiting on them for their comments back. We've sent them our comments. So we're trying to work hard on that. She's worked on the cannabis equity grant and that's getting queued up. And you've got an RFP, RFQ out. So there's been a lot done by her and her team. And of course, they continue to process, they go through the applications.
Okay, Megan, if I could jump in here. Sheriff Kendall is on the line and he's got a lot of things going on, but he would like to make a few comments if possible. So
Sure,
if we could
just a moment.
let him come into the meeting, and I think he wanted to talk about code enforcement or enforcement overall and what his vision is. So if Sheriff Kendall's on the line, great.
Sheriff Kendall, are you there?
Yes, I am. I'm not sure. Can you hear me yet? It just popped over to my screen.
Yes, we can hear you.
All right. Well, first off, I'd really like to thank Chair Haschak and Supervisor Williams for the work that they're doing on this, and it's a pretty heavy lift. I understand that from my position, and I'm very happy that we've got a couple of people on here that are looking at the problems and trying to find some solutions to them. My enforcement objectives, many people have asked me about over the years, and they're pretty simple. My enforcement objectives all deal with public safety. So in no real order, these all take the exact same priority for me. Trespass grow sites on private property or on government property, we won't put up with. We're going to remove those. Cultivations by organized crimes and drug trafficking organizations, because we can't have those folks get a toehold into our community. Grows causing environmental damage, and that environmental damage is on a scale of egregious acts and violations in sensitive areas. Some of the things that happen in our watersheds, including the Eel River and the Russian River, we can't have those. That's poisoning the land, and it will cause Mendocino County to suffer for generations. And then any crimes of violence that are being caused by cultivations. And I'm not talking about cultivators being victims of crimes. I'm talking about any crimes of violence. We will deal with those as well. And I'm giving all of those equal priority. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Sheriff Kendall. Let's see. Megan, a couple questions before we go to public comment.
Yes, the next question I have is from Martha Barra, and she asked, what are categorical exemptions?
And I'm going to turn to Brent Schultz on that, because we had that discussion and question this afternoon. And so I think we were going to go back to Richard Parrott and CDFA to kind of get clarification on what their thinking was, because Richard Parrott was the one who said that that might be an option for us too. So, and Brent is kind of we're unsure about what they meant by that. So Brent, could you explain any further?
Well, thank you, Supervisor Haschak. Yes, Brent Schultz, Planning and Building Services Director. The categorical exemptions are in the Public Resources Code under the CEQA law. And yes, there's a number of items that the state says are exempt from CEQA. I don't see in my reading of it where it is a categorical exemption, especially in light of 8102, which the state legislature passed, which says you have to do site-specific CEQA. So I'm all ears on where that is. I don't see it in the law, and we've read it. And but I would hopefully CDFA can send me, or whoever's saying they could send me the sections in Public Resources Code. We'll look at it.
Okay, thanks, Martha, for that question.
In the big picture, the goal here is to legitimize an industry and have it be regulated. And we're fortunate that we have so many players who want to come into regulation. They want to be above board, pay taxes, protect the land, look out for the environment, and be good neighbors. And so we need some way to separate them from what Sheriff Kendall is, top pointing at, real outlaw activity, organized crime that's, gunshots at night, and activity that's a nuisance and affects public safety. The mechanism we have to separate them is permitting and licensing. And yet the state has created such a system that nobody can get licensed. And so we're about to push the entire industry back into outlaw status, where we lose the environmental oversight and the tax base and the protections of regulation. There may be some opportunities in the year ahead. It may not be CDFA that we're working with directly. The state is talking about merging the agencies. It may be an opportunity to reconsider some of this regulation. Mendocino County is in a unique position in that we have a large legacy industry. And a lot of people have asked me, well, look at this other county, how they're doing it. Well, we look at Nevada County, and I think they had 38 permits. When you're working at that scale, the thousands of dollars that you lose on each one isn't that big a deal, right? You have more of an administrative of cost. You just get the work done. But when you have 1,100 and thousands more behind them, and not new development, we're not looking back 2 years or 3 years. We're looking back 30 years or 50 years on some of these parcels. It's a lot of development to document. And so we really have a unique problem. And then compound with that, our county has some culpability. When we work with CDF, I went in and thinking CDFA was creating problems for us. Well, look at it from their perspective. They gave us about 4 years to connect the dots. We're 3 years in and we're saying, hey, we can't do this. And that they're now wondering, they would have staffed up. They're wondering, why did Mendocino County commit to this if they couldn't follow through? Well, obviously we didn't understand the extent of it and the disruption of having it implemented by ag and then moving and people coming and going. There's all sorts of reasons, but the bottom line is it's not just the state. The legislature, through SB 94, the voters through Prop 64 made it very difficult for small farms to transition into the legal market. But we certainly haven't helped. The people that we have on this today are part of the solution. Megan's working incredibly hard, understands the details, pulling in Trent as necessary, looking at why the steps have failed before, and being honest. It's a lot harder to stand up and say, this is not going to work, than to say, hey, we're working on it, we're streamlining it, we'll get through. And so I think we should take note when staff is basically 100% in the camp of this won't work, we shouldn't shrug that aside, because if a year from now, we may look back and say, hey, it didn't work and they told us as much. There may be a point in time where we have to be honest with ourselves and say, this is Mendocino doing something different than the rest of the state. We're not going to get the same sort of support as other counties that are all in line with each other.
And one of the things that someone brought up the other day was a situation in Monterey County, Salinas area, where they were doing a mitigated negative deck and had a process that was approved by CDFA. And it was like 34 applicants, and the total square footage was 4.1 million square feet. And doing the math on it, it was each applicant, the average was over 200,000 square feet for each one of those grows. So that's kind of the conundrum we're in, or, the situation that favors these big grows, and the small guys are, we're trying to find that pathway, and it's not easy. Megan, do you want to take any more questions? And really, that Supervisor Williams and I, we can take these questions. If you send them in, we can try to answer them offline, the next few days, because I see there's 58 questions, so we aren't going to be able to get to them all, but maybe we should go to public comment at this point. What do you think?
I think that would be a good idea to move to public comment. So if you have a comment, again, as I mentioned earlier, to help facilitate as many participants, if you could limit your comments to 3 minutes, and provide public comment, please use the raise your hand feature if you're coming and using Zoom via the computer or the Zoom app. And then those of you that are on the telephone, please raise your hand by dialing *9. And I have our first person on the that I'll allow to come in and to talk is Martha Barra. So I'm going to bring her in now. And Martha, you can.
Hi, Megan.
Hello.
Hi. So my comment. Let me mute this on my end.
She's muted herself.
You've muted yourself, Martha. You can unmute by pushing
Okay.
the go.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Sorry. So number one, I need to talk about looking at our whole county. And here's a concept that I want you to consider. Is Mendocino County really the place where we can grow cannabis, particularly of any large size? Because if we look at the topography of our county, it's different. It's not Lake County, it's not Santa Barbara, and it's not Monterey. We have lots of mountains and valleys and water streams, and we've been growing, our growers have been into those areas that have devastated our environment for many, many years. And it's time that we looked at that seriously. So I'm just asking you as the ad hoc committee to look at our topography and say, maybe CEQA will not work in our county. So another thing too, and I probably run my 3 minutes. So I will tell you that you will be hearing from many of us in Redwood Valley because we're very concerned about what's happening in our neighborhoods out here for many reasons. But we'll correspond with you directly. Thank you.
Martha, can you hang on for a moment?
Sure.
So I would like to hear what's happening in your neighborhood in Redwood Valley, and is it with legal farms or illegal farms?
They're under provisionals. Let's just say that.
Right. So in this limbo status, there's some people in the program who really care about the land and are good neighbors and are doing it right. And there are other people who got a receipt to not have the sheriff knock on their door. And
I think what we're seeing is a lot of grows coming up, new grows coming up.
So we should
hoop houses without permits and
so illegal activity.
Right.
And so I would like to collaborate with you and figure out how to separate the people who are trying to do it right, playing by the legal system, and those that are putting up hoop houses without permits and creating a nuisance in your neighborhood. Because I think it's both sides lose by having this limbo state where anything goes because we don't know what's legal and what isn't. And it's not really fair to the cultivators who are doing it right to have this competition and their name tarnished because they're grouped together with people who are involved in environmental impacts that shouldn't be happening. So I hope you continue to work with us.
I will definitely continue to work with you, Ted. So count on hearing from us. Do you have anything, John?
No, the same thing. Just let's keep in touch, and we're trying to figure this out. And I totally agree with what Ted just said. And I just want to say, thank you for calling in. We have 116 people on the line.
Exactly. That's why I'm cutting this short.
Okay. Yeah, we could talk all day about this.
Yes,
but
we can.
Really, I want to thank everyone, for being on this call right now. This is a really good turnout, and hopefully people are getting something from it. And if we can keep moving on, Megan, do you have another person for a comment?
Yeah, just one moment. I will add, it's a caller. I don't know their name, so we'll ask when they join. So we go. The person has the last three. It's 17979. To unmute yourself, you're gonna dial *6.
Okay, hello, supervisors. This is Sandra Berman, also from Redwood Valley. I'm so happy to be on the line. Thank you so much. And to start, I think the extensions from CDFA, if that's an option, that sounds really great. So that was something I hadn't thought of, and let's hope that you can get the extension from CDFA. The other thing is, I mean, we just have to, it's so amazing. We are Mendocino County, the premier cannabis county in the world, with our neighbors Humboldt and Trinity. Like, we need to just take a minute. We need to just honor that. And, you know, we're not going to be like the other places. I think one of the most important things to do is just get as many small farmers through to the annual license as possible, because small farming is just, to me, the way of the future. And talking about loving the land and, you know, all the different species that share the land with us. And yeah, small farmers are, you know, cannabis is the biggest engine of our county economy. So we need to be very thoughtful. And it sounds like you all are working so hard, and so are we as cultivators and other, you know, shareholders. So we're all working really hard to do our best, for sure. And I think the most important thing I do is steward the land and try and be a good neighbor and, you know, leave it better for my children. Okay, so another thing is, yeah, I wish I understood why other counties were having an easier time than us. That's something that I'd like to learn more about. Really, how is the best way to get, how is the best way to get in touch with you, Supervisor Haschak and Williams? I'd love if you made it really obvious how we could get in touch with you, because there are so many people on the call who would like to speak. So if you can make it really obvious how we can get in touch with you.
Email, text, Facebook, whatever, you know, call me any hour.
Yeah, maybe just what your email is, like just kind of put it really clear. Like, I don't, you know, just maybe it is on the website. So just emailing you from the county website personally.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. And,
Yeah.
and
Okay.
same with Supervisor Haschak. So what, a couple of your points there to respond to the extension of the provisionals. It's actually not at the discretion of CDFA. It'll take an act of the state legislature. Supervisor Haschak and I have reached out to Senator McGuire and Assemblymember Wood. I think they're both supportive, but you know, they have one vote in the matter. And Assemblymember Wood highlighted that it's important that our county continue moving forward, because if the state sees inaction on our part, they may be hesitant to offer an extension. And then your question about why is it more difficult here than other counties? There's a few reasons. The large legacy industry is somewhat unique. Other counties do have it. Humboldt has it, but Humboldt has use permits. Discretionary use permits are a proven model. They're slow, require a lot of staff time. We're 3 or 4 years behind where we should be, and so it'll be hard to catch up. But it is a proven model that works. If we would have followed Humboldt in the beginning, we'd probably be sitting on 400 annual licenses today. So, you know, where you can help, John and I hear a lot of varied input from cultivators. Some are pleading with us, get use permits going. They recognize it as the viable path. Others are pressuring us to not implement use permits, stick with this phase 1. I worry that's not going anywhere. Hopefully I'm wrong and it generates some annual licenses. But the lack of continuity in the cannabis community is difficult, because frankly, it's split about 50-50, what I hear. And you know what I want? I think what John and I both want is we want cultivators to get to the annual license stage, and we need to get out of this limbo.
Right.
And
So
Sandra, I'll add this. My email is haschakj, HASCHAKJ @mendocinocounty.org. You can certainly email me there. And one thing that everyone can do is for this extension, the Senator McGuire and Assemblymember Wood, they don't want to hear it just from me and Ted. They want to hear it from, constituents, voters. And so if you could, email them or call their office and tell them your situation, that would help too. So if everyone can do that, put a little pressure on them to, keep being very active, which they already are, but it helps to boost their case. Okay, Megan?
Yeah, thank you, Sandra. Our next person up is Mo Marie, so I'm going to allow her to come in now. Mo, you can unmute yourself now and speak.
Hi, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak. I'm going to roll through a couple questions. I'm speaking on behalf of the Covelo Cannabis Advocacy Group. Number one, has the county received outside counsel? And is there an action plan based on outside counsel's opinion, especially if we have favorable analysis? If someone is in phase 1 but is not scaled up to their maximum allowance at this point but wishes to do so, would applying for an administrative permit to change size help someone fulfill the CEQA requirements, since this is essentially a form of a use permit? And an example would be someone that's at a 5,000 square foot right now under phase 1 and is eligible to go up to a 10,000 square foot given their zoning and acreage size. They would have to do an AP for that. I'm curious if that could help them get through CEQA. If individual CEQAs will be required, will all cannabis operators need to do an initial study? I've spoken to a consultant who does CEQA in Humboldt County, and she said that not every applicant has to do the initial study. It's been very unclear. And even in her work, she has not been able to get answers from Humboldt about who has to do an initial study and who doesn't, which I found to be really interesting. Is CDFA ready for applicants to submit directly if they want to take the risk and do so at this time? And also in some of my research, I found out that, biologists, botany, and wetland studies are time sensitive. They can only be conducted at specific times of the year, generally between March and August. And this must be recognized, because if we all have to do CEQA, but we don't find out until early spring that we have to go that path, we're going to miss our opportunity to get these studies done. We have way more questions, but given the time, I want others to have an opportunity to speak. So we'll submit to you guys a memo with our outlined questions. Thank you again. And also, regenerative farms in this county should be categorically exempt. Thanks.
Yeah, well, cannabis should be treated as ag at a state level, right? That's what's creating all these problems for us. Your question about the parameters for site-specific CEQA, if you go the 8102 R2 path, you're bypassing the county. And so, our opinion doesn't have any weight in that scenario. You're doing site-specific CEQA, submitting it direct to CDFA. You would want to ask CDFA what they expect. And ideally, find a professional who has done this before with them, because it could be a very long delay before they ever look at it. And when they finally get to it, you don't want them to reject it for a reason that could have been identified by a CEQA expert. John? Or actually, maybe we could go to Brent first. Brent, can you comment on the moving from 5,000 to 10,000 square feet with an administrative permit? Would that meet the site-specific review requirements for CEQA?
This is Brent Schultz again. Thanks, Ted. I don't think so, because I think the only annual license we ever got was a minor use permit. But let me double check that one, and I can get back to you on that. I'm not sure that admin permit will work. I think it's the minor use permit or use permit that will work. But let me double check that.
And just adding to that, one of the things, Mo, is that CDFA says they don't have the staff to really deal with any kind of quantity of these permits, to deal with them directly. And right now they have 5,000, I think, provisional licenses that they're trying to deal with before, January 1st of next year. And so and 700 of those are from Mendocino County. So we represent 15% of their provisional licenses. So it needs to be something, I think, that we're both working on together, CDFA and Mendocino County.
I skipped over the outside counsel question. The board did give direction. I know Christian Curtis has started that process. I got an update from him earlier today that he anticipates sometime in January having a response back. Depending on what that response is, there may be some next steps. To date, we've had OPR in agreement with CDFA, and our council seemingly hasn't been able to poke holes in it. So I will be somewhat surprised if we get a different answer, but agree that it's a prudent move.
Okay, thank you, Mo. And I think we'll go to our next public comment. It's someone joining us by phone who had the last digits of 4050. You can unmute yourself by dialing *6. So again, dial *6 to unmute yourself.
Okay, while we're waiting, I'd like to just thank Megan Duquette, Brent Schultz, John Burke, Trent Taylor, Sheriff Kendall, for being on the line tonight with us, because it really helps to have their expertise and hear the concerns of everyone. So thank you.
Caller, if you could identify yourself, that'd be great. And thank you, Supervisor Haschak.
Yes, hello. This is Dennis Sloda. Am I being heard?
Yes.
Oh, yes. Well, thank you, folks, for hosting this meeting, and also the upgrade of our code enforcement ordinance from your action last week. My specific question is for John Burks, and basically, what specifically is needed to replace our neighbor complaint-based enforcement system to active enforcement as in Humboldt County? And the related question is, how many cannabis complaints have been received in 2020 and how many have been resolved?
Thank you for your question. I appreciate that. So right now, through board direction, we are a complaint-driven enforcement system. I suppose that it would take further board direction if they wanted to take a look at altering that. And how many complaints? We average about just a little over 300 a year. And how many of them get addressed? They all get responded to. And then I'm happy to answer any further questions.
Well, it doesn't quite jive with what I hear from people, that they call in with a complaint and they might get an answer, well, we're not dealing with that because that's low priority, or they never hear back. So it's not quite what I'm hearing from folks.
Oh, sure. Well, I think maybe part of the confusion is in terms of, regulatory enforcement. Some of these cases take a long time to resolve. So every complaint that we get, we certainly investigate, we invest time in, the due process for administratively dealing with these is pretty robust. So it does take a lot of time. So I think there's a little bit of confusion with the expected result. When you call code enforcement and we respond, it just takes a little bit of time. So I think that having an immediate reaction is more of a criminal enforcement type of scenario. So we certainly are working to expedite these as fast as we can.
I would add, if nothing changes, if we don't get people to the license stage, we're going to lose $5.6 million a year. And of course, if we're talking about wanting better enforcement and to staff up code enforcement and, public safety in general, it's critical that we figure out how to continue receiving that tax base. And it's just that $5.6 million isn't there if we don't have permits and licenses issued.
And we do get a fair amount of compliance as well. So sometimes maybe it's a fault of us for not, letting people know that, the sites that are getting complaints are in fact compliant and that we have investigated them thoroughly, though the expectation maybe for the folks that are letting us know is different than what they, visually are seeing. So we'll definitely try to improve.
To try to turn that into a positive, slightly off track, I've wondered, especially in the context of the equity grants and other funding, if there's a way we can promote some of the people who are doing it right. I mean, I think Mo with her regenerative farming is spot on. And, we have a sheriff who's a bit of an environmentalist, and, he doesn't want to see hillsides plugged with pipes. He wants that water flowing into the creeks and the fish swimming and yellow jackets. And I support that. And I think the cannabis farmers who are doing it right also support that. And there may be people who, what worked for 25 plants on a hillside in Covelo 30 years ago, maybe doesn't scale up to 10,000 square feet. It starts to become an environmental problem. An early step before we ever get to enforcement, perhaps, is education and having a partner in that. So it's not just government telling people what they must do, but it's the cannabis community trying to educate other cultivators on best practices to keep their farms environmentally sound. Could reap better early results.
And Supervisor Williams and I met with people from the Mendocino County Resource Conservation District last week, and they had some good ideas, and we're kind of trying to collaborate on coming up with best practices for cannabis growing and how they can get that word out and help people do these best practices and regenerative farming and what we know is good for the earth.
Well, I guess one last comment is Humboldt County uses active enforcement, and they actually generate revenue from their enforcement practices. And it doesn't involve a neighbor risking their life or their family or their property by, complaining against the neighbor. It's a neutral system there where it's active enforcement, and they know, hey, you can get busted. It wasn't necessarily your neighbor because we're actively enforcing it. So it's just, in this county, the burden is on the neighbor to turn in their neighbor, and you make the complaint, and then you deal with the consequences of a guy with guns, dogs, and whatever else. And it's just unfair to put that burden on the local resident when it's unnecessary, and it should be a county responsibility to enforce their laws and not the citizen responsibility to enforce the county law.
Right.
Well,
I hate to put Sheriff Kendall on the spot, but this might be a question that's more within his domain, because I think code enforcement is for the farms that are trying to do it right and getting into the legal system. The ones that are just purely outlaws, it's really law enforcement. I don't think we can send John Burke out there.
and I absolutely agree with Supervisor Williams in this. And the fact of the matter is, with a complaint-based system, that is not the way that my office works. I've had numerous conversations. Most people realize I am from Covelo, and our response times are not what they should be at times, because the north sector of the sheriff's office is basically 50%, the northern 50% of the county. Supervisor Haschak has also had numerous conversations regarding this. I take in anonymous calls. However, I also go out and initiate, due to our work with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, a lot of investigations and things like that that are based on my enforcement objectives. And we don't require a phone call from someone. We're attempting to actively initiate our own investigations. I don't want a person who is living out in the middle of nowhere to be suspected of turning in a neighbor. As a matter of fact, we've seen recently some people who were pretty awfully bashed on social media because they were believed to have turned in a neighbor when it wasn't actually them. And so if there's those types of things going on, please get a hold of me. My email address is listed on the Sheriff's Office website, kendallm mendocinocounty.org. I return every email. If you want me to, I return every phone call. Sometimes it takes me through Sunday afternoon, but I get it done during the week or through the weekend.
Do you have the adequate staffing to actively enforce in this county?
Well, we're working on getting that, and we have done a lot of active enforcement. This year, I'm just looking at statistics I'm getting ready to provide to Chair Haschak and Supervisor Williams. We've seized 255,000 plants, I believe almost 60 firearms. And, you know, we do have to prioritize. However, our priorities are just exactly what I listed there. And those things take top priority.
No, they were good. Well, I don't want to dominate the conversation here, so thank you very much for your efforts. Definitely appreciate that. And it does sound like staffing and code enforcement need additional sheriffs and code need additional staffing. So thank you very much for your time, folks. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks, Dennis.
So clarification, of course, we will, under board direction, respond to the community however they see fit. So if we need to develop a proactive strategy, we certainly could do that and accommodate it. It just really depends on, you know, how that situation comes together.
Okay, so it is 5:15. We are getting closer to 5:30. So our next caller is Hannah Nelson. I'm going to bring her in. Hannah, you can unmute yourself and begin.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you, Ad Hoc and all of the participating members for taking the time. I think that there's a lot of stuff going on. I want to get a little bit specific and then broaden out to some general comments. Some of my specific comments for MCA include information on the actual CEQA exemptions. It's a little bit sad that our own planning department director doesn't know the specific law behind this categorical exemptions. They're contained in CCR Title 14, starting with section 15300. And there are a few that very well may be applicable to some applicants. And so I think it's incredibly important to not just poo-poo this as yet another rabbit hole to go down. Also, another important thing, and also a little bit sad that our planning department director didn't know this, but in fact, discretionary permits include administrative permits. If a discretionary permit is issued and a site-specific review has been done, then in fact, it shall be eligible for, or is likely to be eligible for, an annual state license. So for example, people who have gone through that kind of administrative permit or full use permit process, for example, for some very small indoor operations that only needed an administrative permit, they have gotten annual state licenses. And in fact, because their sites were reviewed, sometimes they even got it for a second license at the same site that wasn't the indoor because the site was reviewed. Anyway, those are some of the specifics, but generally MCA really feels like it's imperative that the county continue to fire on all cylinders. And that means including devoting some resources to not only evaluate and report on each potential CEQA option and the pros and cons of each pathway, but also categorizing and really sorting through the files. We've heard for years and years that, oh, we're working on organizing the files. Well, I think it's time to really set aside the funding and make sure that there's an effective way of managing those files. And even if it means asking everybody to resubmit everything on a thumb drive or upload to a portal or whatever it is, I think that that endeavor is worthwhile. Certainly, I do know that the cannabis program has been actively sending out the 30-day letters. And I actually know of a lot of people who have been responding with complete information and in fact, providing additional helpful information for an environmental review and a site-specific review. The other thing that we really need to do is to figure out the SSHR situation. And at the last board meeting, the direction was given to go ahead and pursue the CDFW contract, but to only if a referral needed to be done to CDFW after staff reviewed the sensitive species and habitat review, that really it would only be those people who hold annual permits that are up for renewal at the local level that would have that sensitive species review. And we really advocate that everybody who has been issued a permit be prioritized with respect to that, not just those that are up for renewal, but also everybody who is in queue to get a permit. And I think that Supervisor Williams already indicated that there is an agreement of the ad hoc with respect to the fact that every applicant deserves that review. Not only could it be a potential building block if Appendix G is used, and we definitely request that the Appendix G method is also continually pursued for those that are applicable. But, you know, the SSHR could be a building block if the so-called nuclear option has to be attempted by an individual to go straight to CDFA. And so we really request that you analyze whether or not sufficient staff and funding has been set aside to accomplish these firing on all cylinders approach. And we recognize that, you know, staff resources are limited and funding is scarce, particularly in these times. But this industry brought in almost $6 million a year in tax revenue. And that's money that the county is counting on. And if we don't figure out a method that avoids a gap in licensing, you know, not only are current license holders potentially seeking extinction in 2022 if the state doesn't extend that deadline. But in the meantime, if the county doesn't take concrete steps, CDFA has in fact threatened to pull current provisional licenses that are in Mendocino County if the county does not continue to demonstrate an active progress towards CEQA compliance. So we certainly appreciate the tireless efforts and countless hours that the ad hoc has spent. We really hope that the staff that are working on this and the departments that are working on this seek expert help so that they understand the specific exemptions and the specific avenues that are available to sort people, and that up-to-date processes are employed to sort people out and figure out different approaches. We're really glad to hear that you had a meeting today discussing continuing on different pathways for different people. And we just hope that you can not wait for only the phase 3 solution, which is certainly potentially one of the many solutions to happen. And thank you for your efforts.
Okay, and thank you, Hannah. I'd just like to say that we are actively, you know, trying to get people to the annual permits, and it's just figuring out the different pathways. So that is our commitment. And I think both Ted and I have that commitment to the county and to the cultivator.
And I think prioritizing those up for renewal, I think that may have been misinterpreted. The idea here is there may be some hundreds in our queue, people that the county hasn't heard from in years. And we've sent out notices, no response. Working on their paperwork ahead of people who are responsive, probably not the best plan. We should work with those people who are active participants trying to get to the license status. And then when there's time at the end, I'm happy to go back and focus on those, you know, the stragglers that that have been non-responsive. But I think you and the ad hoc are saying the same thing. There needs to be a system of prioritizing, and what we decided is the ones that are coming up for renewal that are engaged with us, that's where the focus should go first.
Okay, thank you, Hannah. We have 5 minutes left, and we have many people wanting to provide public comment. And I'm thinking we probably have sufficient time for maybe one more. unless you have closing remarks, supervisors. So I'll let you decide on what we should do moving forward.
Well, let's go one more, and then we'll talk about how to communicate with the public and get those concerns in another venue.
Okay, the next person up is Paul Hansberry. So I'm going to move him in. Paul, you can unmute yourself.
Hi. Yes, thanks for having this meeting. Certainly appreciate it.
Paul.
Hi. I was in contact with the head of the Office for Cannabis Licensing in Santa Cruz, and they say that they have declared an agricultural activity, not an agricultural crop, but an agricultural activity. And what that did was for all zoning areas that were allowed for agricultural operations, ag or rangeland or wherever agriculture was permitted, it was an administrative permit. They actually use, and for people that are in the hills where it's not zoned for agricultural activity, it was a discretionary use permit that they would need to apply for. They actually used the Mendocino County Resource Conservation District watershed best management practice for cannabis growers and rural gardeners as their guideline for best practices. There's a checklist in there that they fill out. It's the applicant self-certifies during the first inspection. That's verified, and they say that they can get through their application process in 8 hours. It also, by declaring an agricultural activity, anything they can flip over. If there's an ag, people that were say growing apple trees and processing the apples in their barn, they would be able to use that processing area for cannabis as well, without having to go to an F1 occupancy, because it's considered an agricultural activity. Now, it doesn't necessarily solve all the CEQA problems, but it does solve a few of the other things that are barriers for a lot of the people. And I'm just wondering if there's any way to expedite investigating their model to see if it might be able to help Mendocino County.
Well, that was a catalyst for us putting the item on the agenda about a week ago to direct staff to look at treating cannabis from a county's perspective more like agriculture. And this was a June 30, 2020 Santa Cruz Board of Supervisors urgency ordinance. Anybody who reads it, I would recommend also watching the video. They did restrict this model to commercial agriculture zoning, but it was their Board of Supervisors that did that. And if you follow the video, staff actually had a broader recommendation. One element that we don't know is our county has far more serious sensitive species concern than Santa Cruz County. And so it may be that what works there doesn't work here just based on plant life. We don't know how CDFW would respond, but it was the catalyst to begin researching to see if we could move somewhat in that direction. Even if it doesn't completely eliminate the CEQA concern, perhaps it would reduce the burden.
Okay.
All right, well, it's about 5:30, and so we had committed to 5:30. Again, we had at one point 118 people on this call. We have 63 questions still, and so Supervisor Williams and I will try to go through those questions with staff and answer as many as we can in the next few days. If Megan, if you can capture those questions, if that's possible. And so again, I'd just like to thank the staff, Megan Duquette for organizing this, getting it together logistically, Brent Schultz, Trent Taylor, John Burks, and Sheriff Kendall for participating in this. And especially thank you to all of you for spending your afternoon with us and sharing your concerns and questions. We are trying our best with this. we're putting in a lot of time, and we will keep doing that until we figure this out, because we need to make it work for people. And so that's our commitment. Yesterday at the board meeting, we just continued on this ad hoc into the new year, because we've done a lot of work. A lot of work still needs to be done. So I appreciate working with Supervisor Williams on this, and it's been good, but we certainly aren't where we need to be at this point. And so we're talking almost every day about this kind of stuff. So maybe if it's all right, in the new year, we will come back and have another of these, because it certainly seems like there's interest. Hopefully we'll have some good news. And until then, I'll just say happy holidays to everyone, a better new year. And Ted, do you want to say anything?
Thank you for wrapping up here. I'll see you all in the new year.
Okay, well, have a great evening, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.